What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing well. If your training was at all like mine, then your initial assessment looks a lot like running through a checklist of symptoms. Have you ever thought about harming yourself or others? Is there a history of depression in your family? Have you ever taken any medications? Sometimes for me, when I run my initial assessment like this, it can feel a lot more like I'm running through a checklist of to-do items, things that I absolutely have to ask, rather than focusing more on building a strong relationship with this person I'm just meeting with. Now, to be fair, there's absolutely nothing inherently wrong with going about our initial assessments this way. There's a whole bunch of stuff we have to assess for right at the beginning, and the most efficient way to go about it is to just kind of run through a checklist. But speaking from personal experience as the client sitting on the couch, meeting with a new therapist for the first time, when the therapist runs their initial session, kind of like an assessment checklist, I start to feel a lot more like I'm at a medical doctor's appointment rather than a talk therapy session. And the strength of the therapeutic relationship plays such a key role in how effective the treatment is. So in this video, I'll share some tools that I like to use in the initial assessment to help it feel a little more warm and conversational rather than a cut and dry list of questions to kind of get through. So once you've started off the session, you've gotten through the initial admin items like your status as a mandated reporter and any other important information to highlight from the initial paperwork, then it's time to play. And I've developed a kind of default approach that I tend to use across the board when it comes to how I go about this initial assessment. So at the beginning here, I like to give clients an idea of what to expect for the rest of our session, and I'll tell them that, typically in the first session, we spend a few minutes getting to know the reason why they're coming to see me, what is it that they're hoping for from therapy, and then we spend a significant chunk of time zooming out where I get to know who they are as a person, some key moments in their life story, what their core values are, their beliefs, things like that, so that I have a better sense of the context for which this presenting issue is showing up within. And then I zoom back in on the presenting issue and I offer one or two potential paths therapy could take if this person decided to continue meeting with me. And yeah, that's literally it. I mean, that sounds really simple, right? Like, tell me what you're here for, tell me more about who you are in general. Okay, here's some stuff we could do if we keep meeting. But what about all that stuff we have to assess for? What about things like a potential to harm self or others, history of any sort of medication, substance use, mental health concerns, family history? What about things like their sleep, eating, and hygiene habits? Are they able to keep up with their tasks of daily living? Is there anything that's in disarray with their relationships? Are they able to show up to work or school, whatever their daily tasks are? All of these things are very important to assess for. I found over the years that as long as I can kind of hold on the side burner of my mind an assessment checklist of all the things that I need to ask about during the session, while I listen to a client share about their presenting issue and their history and all of that, then there are organic opportunities to naturally ask about most of the assessment questions throughout the entire intake. And then at the end, there might just be a couple left over that I can ask about if we didn't get to them. I'm going to attempt to illustrate this with an example via a role play with myself. Keep in mind, I'm not an actor. Just humor me. I'm trying here. But I'm hearing you say that your parents' divorce really affected you in a lot of ways, so I'd love to hear some more about what other ways you remember that impacting you at the time. Yeah, I mean, where do I even start? It kind of affected everything, to be honest. What about things like your sleep, your eating, even your schoolwork, your friendships? Do you remember any other areas of your life like that being affected around when your parents got divorced? All right, well, excuse my lack of acting skills. I did it for you. But hopefully this paints a nice example of wherever it feels organic and appropriate, I'll sprinkle in some of those assessment questions. And usually by the time we get to the end of the intake, I've already answered most of the assessment questions just by using this strategy. And if by the time I get to the end of taking their history, they haven't covered some of the key assessment items that I'd like to ask about, then I just circle back to them. I'll say something like, there's a few questions that I'm curious about that we didn't get to in your story. Do you mind if I spend a moment asking you a few of those? And then I might revert back to clipboard mode in a way where I'm just running through the questions that we have left. However, at this point, we've already likely established a fair amount of rapport just in the last 20, 30 minutes of history taking, where they might just feel a lot more comfortable answering sort of rote questions, and they might be a little more honest about them as well. So once we've made it through whatever remaining assessment questions might have still been left, I like to circle back to treatment goals. A lot of times, clients have a lot more clarity on what it is that they're looking for after we've gone through more of their history. I like to say something like, okay, I think I'm getting a pretty decent picture of what it is that you're looking for from therapy, but I'm curious to ask if, let's say, you were to meet with me for a little while and you found therapy helpful, what do you think would be different about your life then? Clients tend to be much more specific at this point about what it is that they hope will change about their life, or they may only need one or two more questions for me to invite the specifics of it to get to the bottom of it. After that, we get into the final minutes of the session where I name one or two potential paths we could take if they were to keep meeting with me, and we talk about the logistics of whether they want to schedule and all of that. Now, I'm aware as I offer this tip, it might feel a little overwhelming to try to keep that list of assessment items in the side of your mind while also fully attending to your client as they're sharing their story, you're taking their history and all of that. You can still totally keep your clipboard checklist physically in front of you to just say, okay, I have my checklist here. If I don't get to any of these during the history taking, I'll make sure I just have time at the end to come back to the checklist. And I'm going to repeat something I mentioned at the beginning. There is nothing wrong with a checklist style approach of going through the assessment. I'm also aware that we all work in totally different settings. Different employers have different expectations, different jurisdictions have different things we need to assess for. The way I'm presenting it here may not necessarily be as easily applicable in whatever context you might be working in. But I thought I would share it here just so you could think about what I'm naming to see if there's anything you can integrate in your intake process to make the assessment feel warmer and more focused on the relationship building, while also, of course, keeping in mind the things that we do need to assess for. And before we close, I'd like to thank TherapyNotes.com for sponsoring this video. TherapyNotes is a practice management solution with pretty much everything you need to run your practice, from scheduling to notes to billing, and they have a HIPAA-secure telehealth platform included for free for all members. If you'd like to check out TherapyNotes, you can get 2 months to try it for free with no commitment just by clicking the link in the description of this video. I hope you found this video helpful. Let me know in the comments if there are any tips or tools that you would add to the ones I named here. And until next time, from one therapist to another, I wish you well.